What if the man who promised you everything rejected you for something you couldn't change? If you've ever been told you're too much, this story is for you. Stick around, because what happens next will warm your heart. The train screeched to a halt in the icy air of Silver Creek, steam hissing into the late afternoon hush. Elena Morgan stepped off the last car with a well-worn suitcase in hand, her tall frame casting a long shadow across the weathered platform. At 6 feet, she stood taller than nearly every man back in Boston, a trait that earned her years of side glances and whispered comments. But she hadn't come to Oregon for approval. She came for a fresh start, a place to belong, and maybe, just maybe, to be loved. The letter tucked inside her coat pocket had promised all three. For 6 months, she'd exchanged letters with William Prescott, a sawmill owner who'd written with neat penmanship and a gentleman's tone. He hadn't asked about her height. She hadn't mentioned it. They talked about practical things, soup recipes, timber shipments, books they'd read. It felt honest. It felt safe. Now she smoothed down her handmade forest green wool dress and took a breath as the train's final whistle faded. This was her second chance, but no one was there to greet her. Silver Creek was a logging town carved out of pine and grit, with muddy streets and crooked signs. A few loggers lounged outside the saloon, their conversations stalling as she walked by. Their eyes widened when they noticed her. One even whistled, low and long. A man stepped forward from the general store, tugging off his hat as he approached. He was solidly built, sandy-haired, with a trimmed beard, but he didn't reach her chin. "Miss Morgan?" he asked, though his tone was already unsure. "Mr. Prescott," she replied with practiced calm, offering her gloved hand. "It's good to finally meet you." He took her hand but let go too quickly, his eyes darting from her face to her boots and back again. "You didn't mention your, stature." She held his gaze. I didn't. "You're taller than me." "Yes," she said plainly. "I am." He stepped back. "I need a wife who fits the role." "The role," she echoed. "A woman should look up to her husband," he muttered, voice tight. "Not the other way around." Behind him, someone at the saloon chuckled. Elena stood straighter. "You wrote that you wanted a partner, someone to build a life with." "I wanted a normal woman," he said, then winced. "I mean, someone of ordinary stature." She didn't flinch, even as her heart cracked. "You want someone small enough to not be noticed." "I'll arrange your return passage," he said, already backing away. "The eastbound train comes through in the morning." "I spent everything I had to get here," she said. "I'm sorry," he mumbled, already turning toward the store. "Truly." And just like that, he was gone. The loggers outside the saloon were still watching. One called out, "Need help with that bag, miss?" "Looks tiny in those big hands." More laughter. Elena didn't answer. She stepped off the platform, her boots sinking into the muddy street. Her suitcase felt heavier than it had an hour ago, but she carried it like she always had, without complaint. She passed the general store, the saloons, the church with its peeling white paint, and walked to the edge of town where pine trees loomed tall and quiet. She sat on a fallen log, breath visible in the cold air, and let the silence settle in. Then from behind her, "Quite a view from up here, huh?" She turned startled. A man stood a few yards away, arms crossed, sleeves rolled. He was taller than her by a few inches, with a thick beard and bright blue eyes. His voice was deep, steady, unbothered. "I didn't mean to sneak up," he said. "Name's Gabriel Blackwood. I run the Northern Logging Camp. There's a boarding house run by Martha Webb. Decent beds, hot meals. I'll walk you there if you want." She hesitated. "Why would you help me?" "Because no one deserves to be left stranded," he said simply. "And because folks like you, folks who don't fit the mold, they're the ones who end up changing everything." She stared at him, then nodded. "All right, Mr. Blackwood." "Gabriel," he corrected. As they walked toward the lights of Silver Creek, she felt the townspeople staring. But with Gabriel beside her, it didn't feel as sharp. It didn't cut as deep. Tomorrow she might leave, or she might stay. But tonight she was not alone. And for the first time since stepping off that train, that was enough. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the curtains of the second-floor room at Webb's boarding house. Elena stirred beneath the heavy quilt, her muscles stiff from the long journey and heavier emotions of the day before. She lay still for a moment, collecting her thoughts. She had been left on the platform, discarded like a mismatched parcel, but she hadn't broken. Not entirely. There was still something inside her, call it pride or grit, that refused to shrink. Downstairs, the scent of coffee and frying bacon lured her from the warmth of her bed. When she stepped into the kitchen, Martha Webb turned from the stove with a welcoming smile. "Morning, Miss Morgan. Sleep all right?" "Better than expected," Elena replied, ducking slightly through the doorway, out of long habit. "You don't need to stoop here," Martha said, eyes twinkling. "My husband was tall as a pine, had all the door frames raised when we built this place. He said he was tired of living like a hunchback." Elena stood a little straighter. That kind of consideration was rare. "Thank you," she said quietly. They ate together, eggs, bread, and black coffee, and afterward Martha wiped her hands on a dish towel. "So what's your plan?" Elena looked down at her empty cup. "To stay, at least for now. I have sewing skills. Practical garments mostly. I could earn my keep." Martha didn't hesitate. "The little room off the back porch used to be my sewing space. It's yours now. Good light, decent space. I'd be glad to see it used again." "I wouldn't want to impose." "Don't be silly," Martha interrupted, waving a hand. "Besides, my winter coat needs mending, and I've got no patience for fine stitches anymore." By mid-morning, Elena had unpacked her needle kit and transformed the dusty room into a modest sewing shop. She ran her fingers over the fabric bolts she'd brought from Boston, sturdy wool, cotton, a few scraps of calico. There was work to be done. Word spread quickly. By noon, 3 women had stopped by with dresses needing alteration. Mrs. Peterson, the town's former seamstress, appeared with a shawl and failing eyesight, muttering, "My hands are no good anymore. But you've got sharp eyes and steadier fingers." While taking measurements, a familiar figure darkened the doorway. "Miss Morgan," Gabriel Blackwood said, removing his hat. Elena straightened. "Gabriel, I thought you were heading back to camp." "I am. Just stopped by to check if you were still in town." "I am." "Good." A pause. "You planning to stay a while?" "I might." Gabriel nodded. "Then I've got an offer. My men tear through their gear like wildcats. Nobody up north can stitch a straight line. We could use a skilled seamstress." Elena blinked. "You're offering me work?" "I'm offering you steady coin for repairs. Could be good business." "That's generous." Gabriel shifted, looking faintly embarrassed. "Not generous, just smart. You've got skill. I've got ripped shirts. Fair trade." She smiled. "All right, we have a deal." Before he left, Gabriel paused. "There's a church social next Saturday. Whole town turns out. Good place to meet folks. Maybe take some orders." "You going?" "Not usually my scene," he said. "But maybe this time." Elena watched him walk away, tall and solid and quiet as a tree. The next days passed in a blur of fabric and thread. Women brought worn dresses, men dropped off shirts split at the seams, and mothers arrived with torn overalls clutched in tired hands. Elena worked with a rhythm she hadn't known she missed. Still, the stares hadn't stopped. In the saloon, they called her the giant seamstress. Whispers followed her on every street, but she held her head high. She always had. One evening, as she stitched a coat lining, Martha poked her head in. "That Mr. Blackwood, he sent word. Says one of his men will be by next week with a bundle of repairs." "Already?" Elena asked, surprised. "Said he told the boys, best stitching west of Portland. You've got yourself a fan." Elena looked down at her work, a smile forming. She didn't have a husband, didn't have a home back east anymore. But here, in a pine-framed corner of Oregon, she had thread, purpose, and maybe something just beginning. Not a love story, not yet, but the first chapter of one. Saturday came with a sky so blue it looked scrubbed clean. The church social was the talk of Silver Creek. Pie tables stretching from one end of the hall to the other, fiddles tuning up by the pulpit, and the scent of roast chicken already drifting out the open windows. Elena stood in front of the mirror in her room at Webb's boarding house, hands smoothing the fabric of her best dress. A deep burgundy wool piece with copper embroidery at the collar. It wasn't new, but it was hers, sewn by her own hands. It fit well, strong at the seams, practical and proud. She pinned her hair up, leaving a few soft curls to frame her face, then stared at her reflection. No corset, no stooping, just a tall woman in a good dress, ready to be seen. When she walked into the church hall, the room quieted just a bit. She was used to it. She'd grown up with that silence, the kind that filled space when a woman didn't quite fit expectations. But now, for the first time, it didn't sting. Let them stare. Some nodded, some whispered, some smiled with the kind of polite surprise reserved for tall women who carried themselves like they belonged anyway. Martha Webb swooped in like a ship in full sail. "You look magnificent," she whispered. "You're going to make them regret every word they said behind your back." Elena laughed, tension slipping away like thread from a needle. "That's not the goal." "No, but it's a nice bonus," Martha said with a wink. For an hour, Elena moved through the crowd, meeting townsfolk under Martha's guidance. The doctor, the school teacher, the widow from the post office. They asked questions about her sewing, complimented her stitches. One woman, eyes level with Elena's shoulder, leaned in and said, "You know, I never could reach that top pantry shelf. You're a blessing already." Then the music stopped. Or maybe it just faded, because Gabriel Blackwood had stepped through the door. Tall, broad, dressed in clean trousers and a pressed shirt that still looked slightly out of place on him, but no one noticed the discomfort. He looked like the forest had put on its Sunday best, and he was looking straight at her. He crossed the room with slow, steady steps. A few nodded to him. None dared stop him. "Miss Morgan," he said when he reached her side, "you look well." "As do you," she said, her voice unexpectedly soft. "I didn't expect you to come." "I said I might," Gabriel said. "Didn't say I wouldn't." That was how he was, understated, blunt, and entirely sincere. They talked, drifting toward the edge of the room, where candlelight flickered over the hardwood floor and fiddle music wound back up. The Reverend greeted them both with warm enthusiasm, nodding toward the dance floor. Gabriel looked at her. "Would you care to dance?" Elena hesitated. "It's been a while. Then we'll be rusty together." She took his hand. It fit. They moved slow at first, finding a rhythm. For once, she didn't have to look down. Their eyes were level. Their steps matched. She felt light, not just on her feet, but in her chest, like someone had loosened a knot she didn't know she'd been carrying. As the music swelled, they turned once, twice. Gabriel's hand was firm but gentle at her back. He didn't guide her like she was something to control. He walked with her like an equal. "You're staring," Gabriel murmured. "I'm not used to this," she admitted. "Most men can't handle dancing with a tall woman." Gabriel raised an eyebrow. "Most men are fools." After the reel ended, they stood by the refreshment table, each with a glass of cider. Elena glanced toward the back pews and froze. William Prescott stood there watching them. His eyes narrowed, mouth curled in something between a sneer and a smirk. Gabriel followed her gaze. "Ignore him." "I intend to." But William wasn't done. He crossed the room, polite smile pinned in place. "Miss Morgan," he said. "Mr. Blackwood. Didn't expect to see either of you tonight." Gabriel stiffened. "We're here like everyone else." "Of course," Sir William said smoothly, "though some might say the sight of certain pairs might make tongues wag." Elena tilted her head. "Let them wag. I've been talked about my entire life. It doesn't change who I am." William's smile tightened. "Silver Creek has its traditions. Then maybe it's time those traditions caught up." William's eyes flicked to Gabriel, then back to her. "Well, enjoy the dance floor, Miss Morgan. Though I do wonder, do your feet fit on it?" It was a cheap shot. Gabriel took a step forward, but Elena stopped him with a hand on his arm. She looked William dead in the eye. "I'd rather have feet too big for the floor than a heart too small for the truth." William flushed. "You're making a mistake. Number one just stopped making yours." He turned and left, his boots echoing across the hardwood. Gabriel exhaled. "You handled that better than I would have." Elena turned back to him. "You give me courage." He smiled, small but genuine. "You already had it. I just reminded you it was there." The rest of the night passed in a glow. Fiddle music, conversation, and the warm buzz of something that might have been the beginning of love. As they stepped into the cold evening air, Gabriel walked her back to the boarding house. The moon hung low over the pines, casting silver light on the snow-dusted rooftops. At the gate, he paused. "Thank you for the dance. Thank you for showing up," she said. "It meant more than you know." Gabriel looked at her, something like reverence in his eyes. "You are remarkable, Miss Morgan." And before she could reply, he tipped his hat and turned toward the road, his tall frame disappearing into the dark. Inside, Martha looked up from her knitting and said, "Well, you've got him thinking about more than lumber tonight." Elena smiled quietly. She didn't reply. She just touched her collar where his hand had rested and walked upstairs. For once, not trying to take up less space in the world, but finally daring to fill it. The days after the church social unfolded like a quiet snowfall. Gentle, slow, but impossible to ignore. The air had turned colder, mornings crisp with frost, and Elena found herself falling into a rhythm she hadn't expected. She stitched by day in the back room of the boarding house, her sewing machine humming like a lullaby. Orders came in faster than she could fill them, mending for the loggers, dress repairs for the pastor's wife, a custom coat for the general store clerk who blushed every time he handed over a new piece of clothing. She even made curtains for the schoolhouse, sturdy wool ones that held heat better than the thin lace previously hanging there. But it wasn't just work that filled her time. Gabriel returned to the northern camp the day after the social, and with him went a strange quiet that settled over Elena's days. He'd left a note, neat handwriting on thick paper. "You dance better than most men I know, swing an axe. I'll return in a week. Until then, keep standing tall." G. She kept the note tucked inside her pattern book, reading it more than she'd admit to anyone. A week passed, then two. The second Saturday came with a snowstorm, the kind that warned of a long winter ahead. The town hunkered down, fires lit in every hearth, chimneys coughing smoke into the gray sky. Martha Webb, never one to be rattled by weather, made venison stew and kept a pot of tea going all day. Elena helped with chores and tried not to glance at the road too often. He said he'd return today, but the road stayed empty. By evening, as the wind picked up and snow fell heavy and fast, worry crept in. Elena sat at the parlor window, hands still from sewing, staring out into the thick white curtain that had swallowed the town. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps on the front door. Martha answered it, revealing a young man, one of Gabriel's loggers. His face was red with cold, snow caked into his boots and sleeves. "Miss Morgan?" he asked, eyes scanning the room until they found her. "Yes," she said, already rising. "It's Mr. Blackwood. There's been an accident." The words hit her like a gust of wind to the chest. "He's alive," the logger added quickly, "but hurt bad. Tree slide caught him and his horse up on Raven Ridge. He got the other men out, but he didn't make it clear himself." Martha was already grabbing her medical bag. Elena didn't ask questions. She just pulled on her boots, her coat, her scarf. Her hands shook, but her voice didn't. "Where is he?" "Dr. Phillips's house. They didn't dare bring him farther than town." The snow was knee-deep in some places, drifted up against buildings, clogging the road. But she pushed through it, heart pounding against her ribs like a drum. Inside the doctor's house, the warmth was overwhelming. 4 loggers huddled near the fire, faces pale and drawn. The scent of pine, sweat, blood, and antiseptic filled the air. "He's asking for you," Mary Simmons said quietly, appearing at her side. She wore an apron stained with blood, her expression tight but not unkind. "You can go in, but just for a moment." Elena nodded and stepped into the back room. Gabriel lay on a cot barely big enough for him, bandages wrapped tight around his torso and head. His right leg was splinted and elevated, the wool blanket stained at the knee. But his eyes were still Gabriel. Fierce, focused, and even now full of that impossible steadiness. "You came," he rasped. "Of course I did," she whispered, sitting beside him and taking his hand. "It's not as bad as it looks," he tried to joke, but winced as the words left his mouth. "You're a terrible liar," she murmured, brushing hair from his forehead. "You should stick to forestry." He chuckled, then winced again. "I'll be fine," he said. "Just hate lying still." Then you'll have to learn patience, she said. Fortunately, I'm very good at teaching it. A long silence passed. The fire cracked in the hearth. Outside, the storm howled. I thought about you, Gabriel said suddenly. Every day. Elena's throat tightened. I thought about you too, she whispered. The door opened gently and Dr. Phillips stepped in. That's enough for now, Miss Morgan. He needs sleep. Gabriel's fingers clung to hers as she rose. Come back tomorrow? He asked, eyes heavy. I'll come back every day, she said. And she did. Over the next week, Elena arrived each morning, sometimes with fresh bread, sometimes with books, sometimes with nothing but a quiet presence that Gabriel clung to like breath. He improved slowly. The fever never came. The splint held. The pain began to dull. But the day Mary Simmons brought him broth and found them laughing quietly at one of his terrible jokes, Elena saw something shift in her eyes. Not jealousy, not even regret, but recognition. Mary saw what they were building, and though she didn't say a word, Elena understood. This was going to get harder before it got easier, because Silver Creek loved gossip, and not everyone wanted to see the tall woman and the scarred foreman find something like happiness. But Gabriel was healing, and she would be there every day, standing tall at his side, even when the storm returned. By the end of the second week, Gabriel could sit up for longer stretches, though he still winced every time the pain caught him off guard. The bruises on his ribs had faded to yellow, the gash above his eyebrow was healing clean, and Dr. Phillips seemed cautiously optimistic. Elena had not missed a single day. Each morning she arrived with something. Fresh linens, stew. Martha had simmered overnight, a book, a smile. Sometimes she stayed for an hour, sometimes for the entire afternoon, quietly mending garments at his bedside while he dozed or told stories from the camp. But Silver Creek was beginning to notice. It started with whispers, then glances, then questions disguised as concern. Was it appropriate for a single woman to visit an injured man every day? Was she just his seamstress or something else? And wasn't it curious how quickly she'd become essential? Martha, predictably, brushed it off with a snort. These people don't know what to do with a woman who walks taller than their expectations, she muttered, slicing carrots into the stew pot. Elena tried not to let it bother her. She'd endured worse. But the eyes followed her on Main Street, in the general store, at church. William Prescott didn't help. He'd stopped pretending to ignore her. Now every time they crossed paths, he offered her a smug smile, as if he were watching a slow disaster unfold. Once, passing her on the boardwalk, he tipped his hat and said, "Some folks just can't help but make a spectacle of themselves." She didn't answer, but it stayed with her. Inside the doctor's house, things felt safe, warm. Gabriel's presence, injured or not, had a gravity to it. When he spoke, she listened. When he smiled, something in her chest unfurled. But Mary Simmons. Mary was always there, helpful, efficient, and perfectly poised. Elena couldn't shake the feeling that Gabriel's former fiancé knew exactly what she was doing. Nothing overt, nothing cruel, just a steady presence, a history that hung in the air, unspoken but undeniable. On the 18th day of Gabriel's recovery, Dr. Phillips made his recommendation. "It's time," he said to both of them. "You're stable enough to move out of here. But no stairs, no excitement, and someone needs to keep an eye on you." Gabriel looked at Elena, then at Martha. "I have a room prepared," Martha said without hesitation. "The back parlor has a pull-out couch and plenty of sunlight." Elena blinked. "You never mentioned that." Martha shrugged. "Didn't want you to worry about logistics while he was still bleeding into the sheets." Gabriel chuckled and winced. The next morning he was carried, stretcher-style, into the Webb boarding house by two of his loggers, who grunted the whole way but looked proud to be helping. Elena was already there, smoothing fresh linens, fluffing pillows, and trying very hard not to appear nervous. He settled in quickly. Too quickly. By the second day he was restless. By the third he was brooding. On the fourth he asked for his crutch. "You can't walk yet," Elena said, arms crossed. "I can try." "You're not trying anything until that leg heals." He grumbled but relented. Later that afternoon, as the snow fell thick and silent outside the parlor windows, They played cards. Martha had taught them an old Lakota variant of poker, and Gabriel accused Elelanina of bluffing like a professional. She smiled. I've spent my whole life pretending I wasn't hurt. You think I can't fake a flush? They laughed, and for a moment, everything felt light. But that night, there was a knock at the boarding house door. Martha opened it to find William Prescott standing tall and smug on the porch, his coat pristine despite the snow. I've come to speak with Mr. Blackwood, he said. Why? Martha asked, arms crossed. Town business. Martha didn't budge. You can speak here, or not at all. William stepped inside, eyes narrowing as he spotted Ella Lanina, seated beside Gabriel's couch, mending a shirt. Well, he said, isn't this cozy? Gabriel leaned forward slightly. Say what you came to say. The Railroad Commission vote is in 4 days, William said smoothly. You've missed every meeting, every draft. Some might say you forfeited your say in the matter. Gabriel's jaw tightened. I'll be there. In your condition, I'll be there, he repeated. William's eyes flicked to Elena. Of course you will. Never underestimate the power of inspiration. Elena stood up slowly, tall and unflinching. Careful, Mr. Prescott, she said coldly. You're mistaking kindness for weakness again. He turned without replying, slamming the door on his way out. Gabriel exhaled and leaned back against the pillows. He's going to try something. I know. We need a plan. You need to rest. He looked at her, really looked, and something shifted in his eyes. You're not afraid, are you? No, she said quietly. Not anymore. Snow covered every rooftop in Silver Creek like a thick quilt, softening the edges of buildings, but not the tension winding through town. Everyone knew about the vote, about the land, about Gabriel Blackwood's injury, and, increasingly, about Elena Morgan. The whispers had changed. She was no longer just the tall woman who got rejected by Prescott. Now she was the woman standing beside Blackwood, and depending on who you asked, that was either a sign of bravery or foolishness. Thursday came fast. Gabriel insisted on attending the council meeting. Injury be damned. Elena didn't argue. She just made sure his crutch was steady, his coat was warm, and that the 4 loggers escorting him knew to keep anyone from getting in his way. The town hall was packed, standing room only. William Prescott stood confidently at the front, flanked by maps and charts. He wore his best suit. His smile didn't reach his eyes. I welcome you all, he said, to a vote that will shape Silver Creek's future. Gabriel was wheeled to the front in a modified chair, his injured leg extended. He looked pale, but his voice was strong when he finally spoke. You all know me, he began. You've seen me shoulder timber, pull men from wrecks, fight fires, and bury friends. I don't wear fancy suits or know how to flatter, but I do know the land. And I know when it's being sold off too cheap for too little gain. He gestured toward the map of the proposed Northern Railroad route, cutting straight through old-growth forest. They'll take the trees, flatten the ridge, and when they're done, they'll leave. What'll be left for us? Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Several council members exchanged glances. Elena rose, heads turned. She stood taller than anyone else in the room, not just physically, but in presence. I came here as a stranger, she began, voice clear. I was rejected before I could unpack my suitcase, but I stayed, because some things are worth standing tall for. She looked at Gabriel, then back to the crowd. This town doesn't need fast money. It needs vision, sustainability, integrity. You have a man here who has bled for this community, who understands balance between forest and future. If you turn away from that, you're not just cutting down trees. You're cutting down the very thing that holds this place together. Silence followed, then murmurs, nods, a few cheers. William stepped forward, calm but icy. Let us not forget, he said, that the people pushing against this vote are not native to Silver Creek. They do not represent our history. Gabriel sat up straighter. You're right, he said. I'm not from here. I chose to be here. And I stayed through 10 winters, 10 summers, 10 years of building something real. Can you say the same, Prescott? Judge Porter banged the gavel. Enough. We'll vote. The council convened in the side room. The crowd buzzed. Elena's heart pounded. When they returned, Judge Porter cleared his throat. By a vote of 3-2, the council has decided against the northern expansion. The southern route will proceed. The room erupted, some in protest, most in relief. Gabriel closed his eyes, breathing deeply. Elena squeezed his shoulder. They'd won. But it wasn't just the land that had been defended. It was the truth of their worth. The following week, Gabriel moved permanently into the Webb boarding house while he healed. The town's attitude shifted, slowly, gently, like frost melting into spring. Women brought Elena fabric and pies. Children waved when she passed. The blacksmith even asked if she'd teach his teenage daughter how to tailor.